The evening air was cool and quiet. The sun was setting behind the trees at the edge of the small town. Ethan Cole walked slowly down the sidewalk with his dog Ranger, a big golden retriever with kind eyes. Ethan liked to take this walk every night. It helped him think. Since leaving the army, he lived a quiet life in his small house near the lake. Ranger had been with him through the hard times. They were more than man and dog. They were best friends. The town smelled of pine and wood from the houses that burned logs in their stoves. Ethan liked that smell. It reminded him of safety. He looked at Ranger and smiled. Ranger wagged his tail and walked close to Ethan's side. The world felt calm. Then everything changed in a single moment. Ranger stopped walking and lifted his head. His ears pointed forward. A second later, Ethan smelled it too. It was not the soft smell of burning wood. It was sharper. Smoke, thick and close. Before Ethan could say a word, Ranger barked and started to run down the street. Ethan followed fast, his boots hitting the ground hard. At the end of the road, they saw it. A small house was on fire. Flames were crawling up the walls, orange against the night. Smoke poured out of the windows. Ethan's heart started to race. He could hear someone crying. There was shouting too. Neighbors had gathered, calling for help, but no one had gone inside. The fire was too strong, and no firefighters had arrived yet. Ethan did not think. Years of training in the army came back to him. He shouted for everyone to stay back. He ran toward the house, covering his face with his sleeve. Ranger barked again and ran beside him. The heat was heavy now. It felt like standing too close to the sun. Ethan kicked the door hard. It opened only a little. He pushed again, using his shoulder. The smoke rushed out and made his eyes burn. Inside, it was dark, hot, and loud. Fire roared from the kitchen. Ethan could not see far, but he could hear a tiny voice crying from somewhere inside. He moved toward the sound, crouching low to stay below the smoke. He shouted, asking who was there. The small voice answered again. It was a little girl. Ethan found her near the stairs. Her face was dirty and wet from tears. She was holding a small stuffed bear. She looked scared and confused. Ethan knelt beside her. He told her it was going to be all right and lifted her into his arms. Ranger ran in circles, barking toward the door as if to guide them. The fire was spreading fast now. Shadows and red light moved everywhere. Ethan tried to find the way out. It was hard to breathe. He used a piece of his shirt to cover the girl's mouth and nose. Ranger found a side door and scratched at it. Ethan followed him and kicked the weak wood until it broke. Cool night air came rushing inside. He stepped out and ran to the grass away from the house. He dropped to his knees, still holding the girl tight. The crowd cheered when they saw them. The girl coughed and gasped, but she was alive. Ethan looked back and saw flames breaking through the roof. He heard someone shout that sirens were coming. Fire trucks were on their way. The sound of them was faint and far, but it was enough to make him breathe again. Ranger limped toward Ethan. His fur was dark on one side, where the heat had touched it. Ethan rubbed his head and whispered softly that he was brave. The girl reached out and touched Ranger's ear. She looked small and fragile, her face smeared with ash. Ethan smiled at her and said that she was safe now. When the firefighters arrived, they took the girl from his arms. A woman from the crowd held her, wrapping her in a blanket. The chief asked Ethan if he was hurt. He said no. His clothes smelled of smoke, and his hands were dotted with tiny burns, but he felt only relief. He watched the firefighters work until the fire was under control. Later, when it was quiet again, Ethan stood with Ranger near their truck. The flashing lights painted their shadows red and blue. Ethan looked down at his dog and said softly that they had done something good tonight. Ranger wagged his tail once, as if he understood every word. The night was cold, but Ethan felt warm inside. He turned to leave. He did not tell anyone his name before he drove away. In the dark, the road shimmered with drops of rising mist. The fire behind them slowly became a faint glow in the distance. Ow. The little girl was safe. Ethan and Ranger rode home in silence. The town was sleeping again, but for Ethan, something inside had awakened. He did not yet know how much that one act of courage would change his life forever. The night after the fire was quiet, the sky had turned gray with thin clouds, and the town lights blinked across the lake. Ethan sat on the small wooden porch of his house. Ranger slept beside him, tired but peaceful. The smell of smoke was still on their clothes. Every time the wind changed, that smell came back, sharp and dry. Ethan looked at his hands. The skin on his knuckles was red from small burns. They stung a little, but he did not care. What stayed in his mind was the face of the little girl he had carried out of the flames. The way she had held her bare and pressed her face against his shoulder. He could still feel her small heartbeat. It had been racing so fast, like a tiny bird trapped in his arms. He had told himself the rescue was nothing special. It had only done what needed to be done. He had done that before, in worse places, when he wore a uniform and followed orders. He had saved people and lost people. But that night it felt different. It had been his choice, his decision, not something from a command or plan. The radio in his living room was still on. The local news was reporting the fire. The voice of the woman on the radio said that a man and his dog had saved a child from a burning house. They did not mention his name. They did not know it. They said the man had disappeared before the crowd could thank him. Ethan listened for a moment and then turned the volume down. He did not want those words. He wanted silence. He looked at Ranger. The dog lifted his head and rested it on Ethan's knee. His eyes were soft and calm. Ethan smiled, reached down and scratched behind Ranger's ear, said in a quiet voice that the world had enough heroes on paper. Tonight they had just done the right thing, nothing more. Ranger wagged his tail as if he agreed. Sleep did not come easily. When Ethan closed his eyes, he saw the orange glow of the fire. He could hear the walls cracking and the sound of the little girl crying. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were full of noise and heat. He woke before sunrise, covered in sweat. Ranger nudged his hand as if to ask if everything was all right. Ethan said yes, though his voice was dry. The morning was cool and pale. Mist hung above the lake. Ethan made coffee and poured some water into Ranger's bowl. He sat again on the porch with the cup warming his fingers. The world was waking slowly, and birds sang, and the smell of wet grass filled the air. It was peaceful, almost enough to wipe away the memory of the night before. A few neighbors walked by, waving to him. They whispered to each other. The story had spread fast. Some had seen him carry the girl out. A man from across the road shouted thanks. Ethan raised a hand but said nothing. He did not want people looking at him like that. He liked being invisible. He had spent years learning how to fade into the background. Ranger barked at a passing truck. Ethan watched the road. He wondered what had happened to the little girl. He hoped her mother had reached her in time at the hospital. Hoped the family had somewhere to sleep for the night. He thought about bringing food or clothes, but decided against it. People in shock did not need strangers knocking on their door. By noon, the sun had broken through the clouds. Ethan loaded some firewood into the back of his truck and drove to the edge of town. He helped an old friend fix a fence. The work felt good. It kept his mind steady. When he returned home, he cleaned Ranger's paws with care. Some hair was still darkened from the fire. Ethan rubbed in a healing cream while talking to him softly. That evening, he sat by the window looking out at the street. The world looked normal again, as if nothing had happened. Children were playing near the lake, their voices carrying across the water. Life had already moved on. But inside Ethan's chest, something felt different. He felt alive in a way he had not felt for a long time. There was a sense of purpose again, even if he could not name it. He cooked dinner, shared some food with Ranger, and then turned off the lights. As he lay in bed, he listened to the soft breathing of his dog beside him. For a moment, he thought of the girl's eyes as she had looked at him through the smoke. He wondered if she would remember the man who pulled her to safety. Maybe not. Children often forgot faces with time, but that did not matter. What mattered was that she was safe and alive. Outside, rain began to fall in small drops against the roof. Ethan closed his eyes. The sound of the rain mixed with the quiet rhythm of Ranger's breathing. For the first time since leaving the army, he felt peace, the kind he had chased but never found. He did not know what would come next. All he knew was that he and Ranger had done something good, and that was enough for now. The next day came bright and cold. The sky was clear, and birds sang on the wires above the houses. Ethan was sitting at his kitchen table eating toast when Ranger's head lifted. The dog gave a low sound, half bark and half question. A moment later, there was the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Ethan looked out the window and frowned. A shiny black car had stopped in front of his house. It looked out of place among the older trucks and small cars that usually pass through the road. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wore a long gray coat, her hair tied neatly. Beside her was the little girl from the fire. Ranger stood up, tail still, waiting. Ethan's chest tightened for a reason he could not name. He opened the door as the woman and girl came closer. The woman looked nervous and tired. Her eyes were red as if she had not slept. The girl held her mother's hand, but smiled shyly when she saw Ranger on the porch. Ethan knelt down and held out his hands so Ranger would stay calm. "Hello," the woman said. Her voice was steady, but soft. "Are you Ethan Cole?" Ethan nodded. She gave a small breath that sounded like she had been holding it for hours. "My name is Claire Benson. This is my daughter Lily." She looked down at the girl, who gave a tiny wave. "I wanted to find you to say thank you. You saved her life." Ethan shook his head. "Your little girl was brave. She helped me find her. I just did what anyone should do." Claire reached into the bag she carried and took out an envelope. She held it out toward him. "Please take this. It is not enough, but it is something." Ethan did not move his hand. He could already tell what was inside. The corner of a check showed when the wind lifted the flap. "I can't take that," he said. Claire looked surprised. "Please, you risked your life for a stranger. There has to be a way for me to repay you." He shook his head again, calm but firm. "You already did, when I saw she was safe." Lily tugged her mother's coat. "Mom, can I pet the dog?" she asked quietly. Ranger wagged his tail, and Ethan smiled. "Of course you can. He likes new friends." The little girl bent beside Ranger and began to stroke his golden fur. The dog leaned into her touch, his tail brushing the ground. The woman watched them, her shoulders easing. Ethan stepped back and opened the door a little wider. "Would you like to come in for coffee? You've been driving a while, I can tell." Claire nodded, a bit unsure. "That would be nice." "Thank you." Inside, the small house smelled of coffee and clean wood. There were a few old photos on the wall, but not many. Ethan had never liked keeping too much around. Claire sat at the table while Lily and Ranger settled on the rug near the couch. When Ethan poured the coffee, she folded her hands together and looked at him over the cup. "You're a quiet man," she said gently. "The news wanted your name. They wanted to know who the man was, who ran into the fire. He left before anyone could thank you." "I don't like noise," Ethan answered. "I've had enough of it for one lifetime." Claire smiled a little at that. "I used to think silence meant weakness. I talk all day at work. Meetings, calls, reports. Then something like that night happens, and everything I thought mattered stops mattering." She looked down into her coffee. "I was out of town. I was supposed to be in that house with her, but I stayed to finish a meeting. By the time someone called me, everything was already burning." Ethan understood that kind of guilt even if he said nothing. The house filled with the small sounds of Lily laughing with Ranger. It softened the heavy silence between them. Claire brushed a tear away quickly and tried to smile again. "She adores him," she said. "She calls him the hero dog." "He's earned it more than I have," Ethan said, watching Ranger roll onto his back as Lily giggled. When Claire stood to leave, she tried once more to give him the envelope. Ethan raised his hand gently. "Keep it," he said again. "Buy her something that makes her happy. That will mean more than paper." Claire seemed to study him for a moment, maybe trying to understand why he refused. At last she nodded. She took Lily's hand, and they walked back to the car. Ranger followed them to the gate, tail waving goodbye. Before getting in, Claire turned to Ethan. "You may think this is the end of it, but I don't. I owe you more than thanks. I hope one day I can do something kind for you, too." Ethan gave a small smile. "You already have, ma'am. You reminded me that some good things can still come out of the fire." She looked at him a moment longer, then smiled back and drove away. Ethan stood on the porch, the wind moving gently through the trees. Ranger came to his side and sat down. The yard was quiet again, but something inside Ethan's heart was not the same as before. The world had shifted just a little, and he could feel it, light and strange, like the start of something new. The days passed after Claire and Lily visited Ethan's house. The memory of that short meeting stayed in his mind longer than he expected. He thought about the way Claire's voice had softened when she spoke about her job, and the way her eyes had turned sad when she looked at her daughter. He thought about how easily Ranger had taken to the little girl as if they had always known each other. Ethan went back to his simple life. He worked part-time at the boat dock near the lake, fixing motors and cleaning the decks. He liked the quiet sound of the water and the steady rhythm of the small waves against the wood. People in town still talked about the fire, but fewer and fewer mentioned it to him. That was how he liked it. One Saturday morning, while Ethan was sweeping near his truck, a silver car stopped by the fence. When he looked up, he saw Claire again. She was wearing jeans and a light jacket this time, looking less like the powerful woman he had met before and more like someone trying to find peace. She waved at him. "I brought coffee," she said with a smile, "and some muffins for your brave partner." Ranger barked once, tail wagging. Ethan walked over, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You didn't have to," he said, but the warmth in his voice gave away that he was glad she had come. "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." They sat on the edge of the truck bed while Lily played fetch with Ranger. Claire handed Ethan a cup of coffee. The air smelled of fresh bread and lake water. For a few minutes, they sat without talking, watching the dog chase the small rubber ball. "I wanted Lily to see you and Ranger again," Claire said softly. "She still talks about that night, though I wish she would forget it. But she remembers the man who carried her out and the dog who stayed by her side." Ethan looked at the water and took a sip. "She remembered the good part then. That's all that matters." The morning sun reflected off the lake, gentle and bright. Claire relaxed as they talked. She told him small things about her life, how she grew up not far from this town, how she had worked hard for years to build her company, and how success had made her busy but lonely. Ethan listened quietly. Every now and then, he said something short that made her smile. As the weeks turned into months, these small visits became a habit. Claire and Lily came often. Sometimes they brought lunch and shared it near the lakeside. Sometimes Ethan took them on short walks through the forest trail that led to a hidden clearing full of wildflowers. Ranger always led the way, proud and happy. Lily grew braver each time they met. She liked to help Ethan clean his boat tools and feed Ranger biscuits. Claire seemed lighter too. Stress that used to sit on her face began to fade. When she laughed, it sounded full and calm. One cool evening, the four of them sat by a small campfire near the lake. The air smelled of pine and smoke, but it was a safe kind of smoke that made the world feel warm. Lily roasted marshmallows while Ranger curled at her feet. Claire leaned back on her hands and watched the stars. "I haven't done this since I was a child," she said. "I forgot how good it feels to slow down." Ethan looked at her and nodded. "You're learning fast." She smiled and turned toward him. "You've changed my schedule more than any board meeting ever could." He chuckled lightly. "Guess I'm troubled then." "Maybe the good kind," she said. The laughter around the fire made the night glow even more. Ethan had not realized how quiet his life had been until Claire and Lily started filling it with sound. He found himself waiting for their visits, looking down the road every afternoon as if he could will their car to appear. One evening, Claire told him she had taken time away from work. "I'm spending more days here," she said. "My team can handle things without me for a while." "That's good," he said. "You've earned the rest." She looked up at him, her eyes soft in the fading light. "You help me remember what rest feels like." Sometimes Ethan felt the old walls around his heart start to fall. He was not used to this kind of warmth. He was used to war, silence, and loss. But now there was laughter in his yard, and a little girl playing with his dog, and a woman who looked at him as if she saw something good he had forgotten was still there. When they said goodbye each time, Lily hugged him and told Ranger she would come back soon. Claire always looked back once before getting into the car, giving him a small wave that lingered. As the leaves began to turn yellow and fall across the lake, Ethan realized that his house no longer felt as empty as before. Even when Claire and Lily were gone, the memory of their laughter stayed. He knew he was being pulled towards something he had never planned for. It was quiet, slow, and real. That night, as he closed the door and Ranger settled beside the couch, Ethan looked out the window at the lake shining under the moon. For the first time in years, he felt that life was gently moving forward. Whatever came next, he was ready to meet it with open hands and a steady heart. Winter slowly turned to spring, and the air around the lake began to warm again. The snow melted into the water, and small green shoots started to appear by the road. The town woke up early every morning to birdsong, and Ethan's porch smelled of fresh rain. Ranger liked to sit by the window and watch people walk their dogs. Life had settled into a quiet, peaceful rhythm. Claire and Lily still visited often. Some days they came for breakfast, other days just to walk with Ranger along the trail. The bond among them had grown stronger, not rushed or planned, but gentle and steady. Lily called Ethan and Ranger her heroes, though Ethan always said that heroes were the ones who learned to smile after the fire. One bright afternoon, Claire brought a basket filled with food.
Ow.
She set it down on the porch and laughed as Lily ran to chase Ranger around the yard. Ethan stood by the steps, rolling up his sleeves. "You brought half your kitchen," he said. Claire smiled. "Maybe I was hoping you'd cook something better than I can." Ethan grinned. "That's a low bar, but I'll try." They cooked together in the small kitchen, side by side. Claire sliced fruit while Ethan grilled fish he had caught a day before. The smell of the food filled the room, warm and homely. For a moment, it felt like a family rather than a group of strangers who had met by accident. After they ate, they walked down to the lake. The water was clear, and the sky above was bright blue. Claire stopped near the shore, her hand brushing against a wildflower. "I used to cry every time I passed that burned house," she said. "But not anymore. It doesn't hurt the same way. It just reminds me that something good came after something terrible." Ethan looked at her, then at Lily throwing stones into the water. "Sometimes we don't get to choose how the good things find us," he said. "They just do." Claire nodded and looked into his eyes. "You've taught me a lot, Ethan, more than you know. Before I met you, I thought life was only about success and busy schedules, and you showed me how full quiet can be." He felt heat rise in his chest. "Quiet is where you hear what really matters," he said. The wind moved softly across the water. Ranger barked once and splashed in the shallow waves, chasing Lily's thrown stick. Claire and Ethan laughed as the dog shook water all over them. As time passed, their closeness deepened. They did not talk about love or future plans, but it grew between them in simple ways. In how Claire would bring coffee when Ethan worked early, in how he would fix small things around her company's cottage by the lake, in how Lily would hug him goodbye each time and ask when she could come again. One evening, near the end of spring, they decided to have a picnic by the old pier. The air was soft and smelled of new flowers. They laid out a blanket, and Claire brought lemonade while Ethan cooked simple food on a small grill. Lily and Ranger played in the grass. While the sun sank lower, painting the water gold, Claire sat close to Ethan. "You know," she said quietly, "Lily asked me yesterday if we could stay here forever." "That's a big question," Ethan said with a small smile. "I told her maybe we already are," Claire answered. She turned to him slowly, her voice calm but warm. "This place feels more like home than any city apartment ever did. And you feel like part of that home." Ethan's hand rested on the blanket. She reached out and placed her hand over his. The world around them fell quiet, except for the gentle sound of the water and Ranger's soft bark in the distance. "I never thought someone would walk into my life like this," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Neither did I," he answered. "But sometimes the best things come from what should have broken us." Lily called out for Ranger to come back to the blanket, and they both turned to watch the two running through the sun's last rays. For a moment, everything was just right. There was no past pain, no fear of tomorrow, only calm hearts. When the stars appeared, they packed up and walked slowly back up the hill toward the house. Claire carried Lily, who had fallen asleep in her arms. Ethan carried the basket and Ranger trotted beside them with his tongue out, proud and happy. At the porch, Claire stopped and looked up at the sky. "You think second chances are real?" she asked. "They are," Ethan said. "They don't always knock. Sometimes they walk right up the path with a little girl and a tired dog." She smiled. "Then I'm glad I found mine." Ethan nodded, his eyes soft. Ranger lay down at their feet, watching as the moon climbed higher. The night was cool, and the lake shimmered like glass. Inside the house, Claire put Lily to rest on the couch while Ethan placed another log on the fire. The glow filled the room with warmth. They sat there quietly, side by side, watching the flames dance. It was a different kind of fire now, one that gave light and comfort instead of fear. Outside, the water rippled softly under the night wind. Inside, the air was calm and full of peace. The man who once lived in silence had found laughter again. The woman who once lived for work had found a slower breath. and the child who had faced a fire now fell asleep to the safe sound of home. Ethan looked at Ranger, who was already half asleep by the door. He reached out and took Claire's hand. They said no words. They didn't need them. The quiet around them said everything. The fire burned gently, the house glowed, and love settled in where ashes once had been.